see the movie Jerusalem? That's what it's about.
Anyone who didn't pay rent was out.
The United Nations Development Programme clearly pinpoints human migration as a key driver for development. Migrants, whether legal or illegal, bring with them a series of economic consequences. Johannesburg's inner city rental property market is just one.
The economic importance of migrants generally is something that we can't put a number on. We don't have the data, the government doesn't collect this, and because many of them don't have proper documents, they're not recorded and they're not banking in the formal sector, so it's hard to really understand. But the sort of micro-level research that we've done and other people have done have shown that they are a critical component of the economy. And what we've seen, surprisingly, is that the immigrants in Johannesburg hire people at a higher rate than South Africans who are here. And most of the people that they hire are in fact South Africans.
Gabriel Hertes is lucky to be alive. Around the same time that South Africans were celebrating their newfound democracy and crime was escalating, Gabriel Hertes was fleeing Rwanda because of a civil war and genocide which killed around 1 million people. While many African nationals come to South Africa fleeing troubled situations back home, the xenophobic violence, which swept through the country in 2008, killing more than 60 people and displacing some 200,000, showed that these African nationals are not always welcome. Most of this violence was concentrated in the townships, where rental accommodation is substantially cheaper than the inner city.
Because people want to feel at home, away from home, they are obliged to remain in one place, and which makes conditions in Yeoville to be very bad, because many people find themselves there. Rent is very, very high, and for those first comers, newcomers, it's already expensive. But this is the place, because they hear the history or situation in Joburg, that it's not safe to go and stay in different places in townships. So everyone is obliged to stay in those conditions. And of course they need to be improved, because the people in Yeoville have shown that they can really change, can contribute to the economy of the city, even of the country.
Gabriel works for the African Diaspora Forum and contributes to a supplement which is published in the Johannesburg daily newspaper, The Star. It aims to promote a peaceful dialogue between African nationals and South Africans. When African migrants like Gabriel leave home, they don't necessarily run from their responsibilities as well. Gabriel, like 30 million other Africans living out of their countries of birth, sends money home, which the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development says contributes to around 2% of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP.
You get calls not only from family members, also friends, people who know you, you grew up with, you went to school with. From time to time they tell you, this is the situation I'm in, I need your help, children are going to school. I need to pay for the school fees, please help me. So most of us are obliged to do that, and it becomes a bit difficult for those who don't have the proper documentation. I'm told it's illegal to do that. Even though I've been here for about 10 years, my documents are not allowed to send money back home, so I need to use friends.
To a degree, this is how much of the informal remittance market works. The OECD estimates that more than half of all remittances sent to Africa are channeled through the informal market.
People either don't rely on the formal markets, the banks have too high intermediate costs. The people don't can't find banks where they live or where their family live. A problem of or a specificity of African immigration is that many people live in rural areas, and so the formal banking system don't reach these people.
Official data for remittances is hard to come by, but the World Bank says that for some countries like Nigeria and Sierra Leone, the remittances to GDP ratios for 2009 stood at between 8 to 11%. And for formal money transfer companies like Western Union, inflows into African countries spell big business.
If you look at the figures issued by the World Bank, you'll see that there's close to 215 million people living outside of their country of origin, and that these people are remitting close to $420 billion worth of money back home on an annual basis. That was the 2009 figure. And when you put that in the context of Africa, $40 billion coming into Africa.
Remittances to sub-Saharan Africa might be a lot less compared to Asia, where these inflows account for around 4% of GDP. During the recession, Africans were sending money home consistently, albeit in smaller amounts. In fact, in 2009, remittances to sub-Saharan Africa dropped 3%, compared to 6% in other developing countries.
It's striking that in Africa, remittances were much more resilient to the crisis. That is that foreign investment, for instance, decreased by 15% in sub-Saharan Africa in 2009, which is 5 times higher than the drop of remittances. It means that migrants abroad feel responsible for their families.
And it was no different for African nationals living in Joburg's inner city. They still sent money home during the recent financial crisis and recession. They also continued to move in and around the city. And the country's overall housing shortage meant the prices compared to other affordable areas in South Africa remained robust.
2007 was the height of the boom. It was a very difficult period if you look at where the economy went, and there was definitely a lot of pressure on prices. But Yeoville was one of the suburbs that definitely stood out with exceptional growth rates in terms of volume and value.
This growth in demand has been at the expense of the buildings themselves. First National Bank data shows that there has been little to no significant development in Yeoville since the 1960s. This means that the returns in this unregulated market are surprisingly high and will continue to be so, as long as it stays unregulated, that is.
From the ownership statistics that we've seen from the Deeds Office, it looks like there's already a very large proportion of the owners of Yeoville is not necessarily the residents. There's a large portion of investment owners, where a certain investor or investment company would own 30+ residential units, and they would rent these out, obviously through an agent or so, to the tenants that stay there. So there's definitely a very good market for rental and owning these properties, renting it out to the residents, because the residents might not be able to afford buying a property or have proper employment in the formal sector, so the banks would not be able to assist them with credit.
The influx of migrants poses a serious challenge for the Department of Human Settlement and other government departments. But the government has made it clear that rejuvenating the inner city is part and parcel of the country's overall housing strategy. And a task force has been put in place, consisting of various entities, including the police, to claim back the city block by block from building hijackers and slumlords. As you can imagine, it's no easy task.
For us, it's really about to get that building right. It's about to get the owners of those buildings to take out those buildings. It's about the owners to work with the tenants to ensure that they find solutions to the problems of slum buildings. So we are looking at it from all angles. We are not only targeting one particular group, but at the same time also saying that once you are a tenant, you also have some responsibility in terms of the space to occupy a particular building. So it's a wide range of interventions that we are looking at. It's not only just saying that upgrade the building, because we upgrade the building and only to find that the people who are occupying the buildings will also make it deteriorate again. So we need to make sure that we seal that gap. So I'm saying it's a very long, tedious process. But for those who are involved in criminal activities, as you know, that we've got a national task team that we've established, which is chaired by South African Police Services. We've got the Hawks, we've got the NPA, we've got South African Revenue Services, we've got our own legal team that is working on these cases. Like in December alone, we raided about 39 buildings, and we were able to arrest some of the thugs who opened about 400 of them. And currently, we're able to return about 60 properties to their rightful owners.
But many are skeptical of government's ability to tackle the sheer scale of the inner city problem.
Look, the task force is great. I mean, it's really a focus on trying to deal with these issues. But I think one of the problems we have at the moment is that, first of all, I think there's a lack of coordination between different departments within councils and within government, and then there's a lack of coordination between from council level to provincial level to government level. I certainly believe between the private sector and the government sector, there's no question in my mind that we can address the problem, but it needs to be on a grand scale. And it needs to be addressed pretty quickly.
I'm comfortable to say we've tackled in terms of serving notices and in terms of trying to do and take over those bad buildings. Because before a building gets bad, it actually is when the landlord is not there or it's been taken over by gangsters. And what the city does, it stops services to that city, whether it's energy to that building, whether it's provision of water and or electricity. And we've actually, therefore, as a city, once the building has got enormous arrears, we then take over that building to a project which we called a better building project, where we're actually going to gradually release those buildings for private sector investors to actually take over and manage those buildings better.
And what happens to the people who are currently living in those buildings?
In most instances, because as a city we've got an obligation to provide, when we take people out, we've got an obligation to provide alternative accommodation. You've heard me talking about transitional housing, that we're actually going to be spending 13 million on 2 transitional housing.
But ultimately, for more private sector players to enter the market, the returns need to be there. For Yeoville, it appears for now, they're not.
A lot of the land has already been saturated, so there's not much space for development. And if you look at building trends recently, it's still very expensive to bring a new property to market. Our latest figure shows that the replacement cost gap is about 20%. So in other words, if you build a property, it's going to be 20% more than buying an existing property. The replacement cost values for the sectional title properties in Yeoville is rather low. We're looking at about 2,500 rand per square meter, which is exceptionally low for the type of accommodation that it offers. And to develop new properties, the profit margins is just not as attractive to develop properties in that segment as it would be for a more affluent suburb.
But those who've lived in Yeoville and have seen a thing or two seem to disagree.
I think the risk is that Yeoville will be gentrified. That what will happen is that developers will suddenly discover Yeoville. And they will move in here and they will basically make Yeoville into a yuppie, buppy, black diamond kind of environment, suburbs that are on the periphery of the city, and you'll lose a whole lot of the quality and the character of this area.
And it's this uniqueness of Yeoville that is undeniable. After all, this is the place where you can find food from the entire African continent under one roof.
Yeah, here is very, very nice, because people now know that Yeoville is where they will find African food. Yeah, this is cassava. We have the powder one, we have the seed one. This one is when you are hungry, you are tired to cook. You just take this one and put it in the water and eat it.
Okay.
No infection, no anything. It's good making your body.
Yeah.
You can't get too much fat.
What guides the JDA is like in areas or in cities as great as New York. New York was created by migration of Italians, of Irish, and therefore Johannesburg, for it to be a world-class African city, it has to accommodate the fact that it's going to be attractive for other foreigners to actually come.
While there's no major formal data showing the economic impact that migrants have on the countries they move to, the research that there is shows that this contribution is certainly significant, both to South Africa as well as to their home countries. How South Africa will make the most of this contribution will require some creative thinking as well as a holistic and inclusive approach.
Project